in 1934, a thing called the Hays Code, or the Motion Picture Production Code, kind of came into being, and all these rules were enforced. And movies could not do certain things, they could not show certain things, and in 1936, the studios first started to take an interest in this movie. It was published in a magazine in installments. So you had to sort of buy several issues to get the whole story, but they saw something in it, and they saw this is going to make a great movie. So the studios were all fighting over it. But the Hays Code had just come in 2 years before, and Joseph Breen, who was in charge of the office, he kind of got in touch and he said, "Look, there is no way. We cannot allow this. This book is unfilmable. You guys got to forget about it. Just back off." And meanwhile, they had been almost in a bidding war over this, and I think they got up to about $25,000 for the rights, but they all just kind of backed off, and it took years before Billy Wilder got involved and decided to take another run at it, and apparently he had to go back through the office, and he had some kind of a script, a partial script or something. I'm not sure what he showed them, but it must have been something where he kind of said, "Okay, here's how I'm going to handle it. Here's what we're going to do." And so this time, Joseph Breen and the Hays office said, "Okay, well, maybe we can let you do it, but we've got some concerns." And in fact, there were 3 big concerns that they had with what was in that version of it. And that needed to be dealt with. But I mean, this was the problem that they were all facing. Every Hollywood film, you had to go through the Hays office, Joseph Breen, and there were just crazy rules that you had to follow. So this was this story was one that was very problematic. Well, I was going to ask you if you knew what the things were that they had a problem with in the story.
No.
No.
Why don't you tell me, and I'll pretend like I know.
Okay. Well, one of the things they had a problem with was the character Phyllis Dietrichson appearing in a towel at the beginning of the film,
Mhm.
which of course is a very striking moment, and it's in the film, right? They got away with it.
Which is ridiculous because, I mean, you don't see anything. I mean, if it wasn't a
No.
towel and it was just a dress that showed the exact same amount of flesh, it'd be no big deal.
Yes, but that was one of the things they objected to.
Why
Another
would you
thing
think
that,
I would know that? Is this
oh,
trivia? Like, why would I know
no,
that?
it's not. It's not trivia, but I was giving you a chance if you wanted to jump
I
in.
know I did not know that. Go ahead, continue.
Okay, so
Putting me on the
another,
spot, like, well, why don't you tell us what the answer is? I don't even know what the question is.
okay, well, another thing they objected to was the ending of the story, which is different in the book, and I guess they were planning to do it in the movie. They wound up not doing it, or kind of not doing it, but it was basically a gas chamber execution scene
Yes.
where the main character gets executed at the end. And the funny thing is, you would think that the Hays office would like that, because this is showing crime doesn't pay. They're punishing a character, and this is all very important. This is stuff that's in the code. You've got to punish people. If they do something wrong, they've got to suffer because of it. And so showing a really painful execution scene, you would think they would be all over that. Like, yes, this is what you have to do. You've got to show people that this is really a bad idea and you don't want to do these bad things. But they didn't like it because it was too gruesome. They found it was just going to be too offensive or something, so they really didn't like that ending, even though it seems like exactly what they want in a way. So that's interesting. But the third thing that they objected to was the movie portraying the disposal of a corpse. Or I suppose, to put it differently, maybe just the fact that it's kind of showing you how to commit this crime in a way.
Mm.
which is something that the code was very much against. You know, you were not supposed to show how to do bad things. You weren't supposed to teach the audience how to do it.
The
And
book the book is just very short. That was the main focus of the book. It was just how they committed it or how the lead character went about committing it, all the steps he took. It was just step by step, this is how I did it. So they had to show some of it if they're going to be interpreting the book because that was the main
oh,
focus of the book. It's just a
oh
step by
yes,
step on how am I
yeah,
going to do this? What am I going to do? Planning it out, having it play out, all the mistakes that were made, and it was just almost procedural.
yeah. And you know, the thing is, like the movie, pretty much, it does contain basically it shows you how they do it. You know, not only how they commit the murder, but how they defraud the insurance company. He talks in great detail about, oh, you know, you got to do this and that, and don't do this. And so I can see how that would have really been, you know, sending red flags to the Hayes office about, you know, you're teaching people how to do this. You know, this is not something we approve of. But the amazing thing is, like, even though these were the things they objected to, for the most part, they're still there in the movie, except for the execution scene at the end. So interesting.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you left that out. You have no movie.
Yeah, yeah. But you know, morality. I suppose the other thing was the famous singer Kate Smith, who perhaps I don't know if you're familiar with Kate Smith. Have you
I'm not a
ever?
hundred, so no, I'm not familiar with Kate Smith. But
Yeah,
go
yeah.
continue.
Yeah, so anyone who, you know, collects records and you sift through old bins of records in a thrift store, you're going to see Kate Smith records. She was obviously very popular. She put on a lot of records. And in fact, she had a lot of hits, you know, a lot of hits, a lot of top 10, top 20, top 40. One of her most famous songs, I believe, was God Bless America. Is that what it was called? Um, but she actually hit the charts three separate times with that song. Went to number five once, and number 10 a year later, and then I think it went to number 20 something a couple of years after that. So I mean, that song was a real powerhouse for her. But she clearly, you know, she never married. She was very religious, and she kind of was very moral. I guess she had a high level of morality, and this is why I guess I don't even know whether she read the book or if I don't know if she knew anything about it, but she obviously objected to this story, Double Indemnity, you know, and she felt that it should not be made into a movie and people shouldn't see it, and so she really fought against it. And the interesting thing about her is her most distinguishing feature, I guess, is you know, don't even want to say this, but she was quite overweight. You know, when you see her album cover, she's quite a large woman, and
Well,
so
when she's unmarried, she's super religious. So I'm assuming that you said she wasn't married, right?
she wasn't married. No, she
She's
never
not
married.
married. If she's super religious and she's not a religious hypocrite, she probably wasn't having a lot of premarital sex. So if you're not having sex, you don't have someone, you're not in a relationship, you're probably going to substitute that with food. So that's not necessarily surprising.
Yeah, yeah. So James M. Cain, when he was asked about this years later, he said, "Well, we had a little trouble with this fat girl, Kate Smith." So that's how he summed it up in a very hard-boiled kind of way. But he basically felt that, you know, her campaign didn't work, and if anything, it may have helped the film. He says that she may have increased the box office by about $1 million by telling people not to go, which of course makes sense. You know, if you tell people, "Oh, this movie is really offensive, it's really shocking, don't go," of course it's going to make some people go, don't you think?
Well, I've had some bad reviews of some of my movies where people say don't watch it, and you know what? People didn't watch them, so I don't know. Sometimes negative reviews they don't work, or they do work, or I don't know. But I don't know. Watch my movies, I guess is my point. Continue,
Yes.
please.
Okay. Well, just as a footnote, many, many years later, well, Kate Smith, she got herself into a bit of trouble. She was already dead, in fact.
She
She
got
got
into trouble after she died?
she got in trouble. She basically, I think she's kind of been canceled now because her
I don't think she cares if she's canceled now. She's probably been dead for what,
no,
50 years or
uh,
something?
yeah, something like that. I don't think, yeah, yeah, it didn't matter to her, but her song "God Bless America." What
Hmm.
happened was a lot of sports teams were using it. They were playing it at the games. And in fact, one team even had some kind of a statue of her that they had erected. And so then in 2019, there was a big kerfuffle because somehow it came out that she had recorded a couple of songs, probably back in the 20s or the 30s at the latest, and they were, by today's standards, I guess, racist.
Racist. Yeah.
And I think they were popular songs. They were from musical reviews at the time, like they were, just considered songs of the day, I guess. And I don't think
They didn't age well.
they didn't age well, and I mean, she certainly didn't write them or anything, but she sang these songs and recorded them, I guess. And so they kind of canceled her. All the sports teams got rid of her, and I think they got rid of the statue. And so all these years later, I suppose you could say it's karma or something that she tried to stop double indemnity with her morality concerns, and now all these years later, other people have kind of stopped her with, albeit different concerns, but you know, maybe it is kind of a weird reversal.
I don't know. Maybe they should resurrect her and then cancel her and then kill her again.
Well, I guess we talked briefly about Billy Wilder, but we should maybe say a few more words about Billy Wilder and his
We haven't
career.
said anything much about Billy Wilder, one of the
Well,
great all-time filmmakers. Not
yeah,
my personal favorite from this era, because this era had a lot of filmmakers that made like 50 to 100 or more films. And there were a lot of great filmmakers during the studio era. Definitely, if you want to subcategorize him, where you don't have to include all of them, and maybe just go writer director, then he'll probably raise up that list a little bit more. But he made a
yeah.
lot of great films. Do you have his filmography open? I mean, off the top of
Um,
my head, I think The Apartment was one of his popular films. I know he worked
oh,
with Jack Lemmon a lot. Some Like
yeah.
It Hot, Sunset Boulevard, this. A lot of great films in there. A lot
Oh,
of duds too, especially towards the end. I mean, a lot of silly comedies and stuff from my
yeah,
memory. But if you have
yeah.
his filmography in front of you, maybe you can let me
I
know.
do, I do. And I was going to say that he sort of started in Germany, and he worked on a bunch of films in Germany. He produced films, and then of course when Hitler rose up to power, he decided better get out of here, and that's when he came to Hollywood. And he really started out as a writer, and he wrote a lot of scripts for some really good filmmakers like Ernst Lubitsch, Mitchell Leeson, and so he wrote some good movies, including A Ball of Fire, is that what it's called, with Barbara Stanwyck, um,
Yeah, yeah, that was a good one.
and many others, many others. But then he started directing, and he directed two movies before Double Indemnity, which are maybe not as well known, but The Major and the Minor and Five Graves to Cairo, which are both considered to be good movies, but they're kind of standard, ordinary kind of movies. And then Double Indemnity came out, and this is kind of what really solidified his reputation as somebody to watch. He was doing something really interesting here, and this was, a lot of people feel it was the first of several masterpieces that he made.
Yeah, he
And
impressed. I think Hitchcock was really impressed by this film as
oh,
well.
he was, and Billy Wilder, he kind of viewed Hitchcock as competition in a way, because he was another, really good filmmaker of the day, making a lot of good films. And I think that was part of his motivation in doing this is I'm going to make a really suspenseful movie. It's going to be more Hitchcock than Hitchcock or something like that. But but yes, Hitchcock did really like this movie. Um, and after this, he made one called The Lost Weekend, which actually won
That
Academy.
one hasn't aged well. I try to like it.
Yeah,
It's not a bad movie. I mean, probably a great movie for its time because I think it won Oscars,
it did.
multiple
Yeah,
maybe.
it
But
did.
it's not something that ages well. It's really like it's one of those older. So there's a lot of old movies, right, that are considered great, either great
Yeah,
when it was released or great with the passage of time. And when you have like a newer or audience or like a younger audience and you're trying to introduce them to older movies, that's the exact type of movie you don't want to introduce them to, where you say, "Oh, this is a great older movie. It was directed by a great filmmaker. It won Oscars. I think it won at least one, but probably
yeah.
multiple Oscars."
Oh
So
yes.
everything that I just said makes you think this is a must-see movie. But
Yeah,
again, when you're talking about a younger audience, showing them that type of movie is going to make them not want to watch older movies ever again, you know? It's more so like a Sunset Boulevard you have to show them, maybe something
yeah,
that didn't wasn't as successful and didn't win an Oscar or stuff like that because again, even though that movie's considered great and people are going to still consider it great because of Billy Wilder, and because it won the Oscars, it's not really, I don't know, it's not really anything special.
well, I gotta confess here that this is one of the Billy Wilder films that I actually still haven't seen. I haven't.
Oh,
I couldn't
so
bring
I said
myself.
all that. I was just talking to myself then when I
Well,
was
no,
going over the
no,
movies.
no, because I'm illustrating the point here because I like Billy
No, you're
Wilder.
not. You didn't see the movie. So what's the point? Nothing I said mattered. If you didn't see the
No, it
movie, you
totally
don't have an
does.
opinion on the movie because you didn't
No,
see
but
it.
I do have an opinion because the point is that I feel it's a movie I should see. I feel it's supposed to be a great movie. And I like Billy Wilder's movies, but I keep thinking, I don't really feel like seeing that one today. It somehow doesn't appeal. It feels like it's going to be painful. It's going to be difficult. It's about an alcoholic, right? It's an alcoholic writer.
Yeah, I think it's essentially like him lashing out in Raymond Chandler or something, you know.
Yeah, yes, it is.
So,
It did win
I mean,
four Academy Awards: Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actor, and Best Adapted Screenplay. So it kind of cleaned up in a
yeah.
way that this Double Indemnity maybe should have. This Double Indemnity was nominated for a lot of awards, but didn't win a single one. So in a
So
way,
there was
he
this movie called The Artist. Have you ever heard of it?
yes, yes, I
I
have.
don't think if you ask even like hardcore film fanatics, most of them will not they've never seen The Artist. Maybe some of them heard of The Artist. I think that won Best Picture and at least Best Picture, maybe multiple
It
Oscars.
did. Yeah.
There's also this movie, I don't know if it's called Crash. It's
Yes.
this
There's.
movie that had like 20 or 30 A-list actors in it. That
Yeah.
was this movie about racism.
Yeah.
And I saw just like a clip of it. I'm like, no, this has to be a Saturday Night Live parody sketch, right? There's no way this is a real movie. Like the
Yeah.
way they viewed racism and the way they talked about racism is like, no way. There's no way this is a real thing. And then there's no way it's going to win an Oscar, and it did. Like some
Yeah.
really bad movies win Oscars, and some movies like you've never heard of again win
Yeah.
Oscars. And to me, that's the lost weekend. If it wasn't directed by Billy Wilder, I don't think anyone would. It would be like The Artist or Crash. I think Crash is the name of the movie. Maybe it's something
Yeah.
else, but
Yeah. It is. And in fact, Crash by David Cronenberg is a movie I really like.
mm,
But this is a different Crash, which came out a few years later.
yeah.
Um, so yes, yeah, I know what you're talking about. But anyway, so Lost Weekend, it's considered to be a great movie. Whether it holds up or not, I don't know.
But yeah, to bring The Lost Weekend back to what we're talking about, aside from being directed by Billy Wilder, it was, I think, his next movie after this. And
Yes,
obviously, they saw that this movie was better than they thought it was. It aged really well. It was a mistake not to give him more awards or more praise. So it's kind of like a makeup Oscars he won with The Lost Weekend. well, we haven't gotten into it yet, but the writing behind this movie is a huge part of it.
Yes.
The author of the book, the co-writer of the screenplay, of course, Billy Wilder being a writer-director, and then from that writing experience is how The Lost Weekend came to be. He had a drunk writing partner that he
Yes.
didn't get along with, and then his next movie is about a drunk writer.
Yeah.
Go
Totally.
figure.
So after the Lost Weekend, he made a couple of lesser known films, The Emperor Waltz, which is a comedy and then, or a musical, I should say, and Foreign Affair, which was kind of a romantic comedy. So after Sunset Boulevard, Ace in the Hole, which I think is a great movie.
Yeah, I think that was another big hit. That's Kurt Douglas, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Very dark, kind of a noir, but interesting in that it was shot out in the bright sun. You know, it was in the middle of the desert. So he out noired everybody in the bright sun. And then after that, Stalag 17. And I guess they made Hogan's Heroes based on that, right?
Yeah, yeah,
TV
yeah.
series. After that, Sabrina, which was
Oh, that's
another,
another hit. That's also Humphrey Bogart. Yeah. And
yeah,
William Holden again. I didn't realize he worked with William Holden so much.
yes, he really liked William Holden. And I think William Holden really liked him, actually. They had a good relationship. So the next one was The 7 Year Itch, which of course is a classic. I mean, people love that movie.
Yeah.
Um,
Speaking of the 7 Year Itch, that's another thing about since we're talking about Billy Wilder and we're talking about like women and all this stuff,
yeah,
he was a womanizer. He
yeah,
was a notorious womanizer, and I think he had an affair, pretty sure, with Marilyn Monroe. That's why he worked with her a couple of times as well.
that could be.
Yeah.
But
I think that was the main thing with him and Chandler is that like it was almost like Jerry Lewis and who's that guy Jerry Lewis was the buddy team with? The
Dean Martin,
Dean Martin. Where it's like you think, oh, Dean Martin, he's the one, the handsome guy, but Dean Martin would just get drunk in his hotel room every night, and Jerry Lewis would be banging all of like the groupies. And it's kind of like that with Billy Wilder. He just looks like this short, like unassuming, balding, fat guy, but he was having a lot of affairs with a lot of different women. So while he was having affairs, Chandler was, getting drunk everywhere, and that's what led to a lot of their tension. They didn't like each other personality wise. But yeah, speaking of the 7 Year Itch, I'm pretty sure you had like a thing with Monroe, either during this or Some Like It Hot.
yeah, well, that could be. After The 7 Year Itch, he made The Spirit of St. Louis, which is an aviation biography with James Stewart. And then he did one called Love in the Afternoon with Gary Cooper and Audrey Hepburn and Maurice Chevalier.
I saw that one.
Yeah,
I think Gary Cooper didn't want to do that movie because of the age difference with him and
yeah,
Audrey. Like he didn't think it would be believable or whatever
yeah.
that to do it. But I thought he was really good in that. They were both really good in that.
Good to know. And then the next one I think is one that I quite like, Witness for the Prosecution. And then after that, he did Some Like It Hot, which we've already made reference to, another Marilyn Monroe film. But I think he, whether or not he had an affair with her, I think he commented after making 2 movies with her that he didn't want to do that again. It was a little too difficult. She was a little too difficult to work with or something.
I
So,
think she was like kind of at one of her low points during that. I think you could see like she was more heavy set than she normally is.
yeah,
But yeah, I mean she always had issues with drugs and alcohol and things like that. And I think around Some Like It Hot was a low point for her. I think even the actors in that movie were complaining about having trouble with her as well.
yeah, that could be.
Yeah.
And then after that one was The Apartment, which I think is a classic as well.
Yeah, I don't really
Uh,
like it, but that's one of his that's one of the movies that people really lean towards when they talk about him, like as one of his great films. I don't
yeah,
really care for it.
okay. And then after that, there's a few that are probably not quite as well known. 1, 2, 3. Did you ever see 1, 2, 3?
Is that with James Cagney?
It is, yes, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the movie where James Cagney said like I'm too old for this.
It could be, yeah. I thought it was actually kind of an interesting movie, but not quite as good as his earlier stuff, you know.
Hmm.
But it did have something going for it. And
Hmm.
then he did Irma la Douce, Kiss Me Stupid, which was Dean Martin, Kim Novak, Ray Walston. The Fortune Cookie, which I believe was maybe the first movie Jack Lemmon and Walter Matthau collaborated on, and they kind of became a bit of a team. They made several films together, more than one with Billy Wilder, in fact. I think it's a good movie, The Fortune Cookie,
Hmm.
in '66. The Private Life of Sherlock Holmes, which is another interesting one.
Hmm.
Um, don't think it's quite as successful, but it's interesting. Avanti with Jack Lemmon, sort of a European movie in a way.
Hmm.
And then he did The Front Page with Jack Lemmon and Walter Matthau. And then in '78, he did one called Fedora, which I actually haven't seen. That's one I haven't seen. I've heard that it wasn't that successful. And then his final film as a director was Buddy Buddy, which I think he was not happy about that being his final film. It was another Jack Lemmon and Walter Matthau. And I actually saw it on TV when I was a kid, and I thought it was interesting. I liked it. Like, it was different. It was kind of, in some ways, it was like a Neil Simon comedy, except it was about a hitman trying to kill someone. So I thought that there was something about it that I liked, but I think it's generally considered to be one of his worst films. That's his filmography, but certainly a lot of great movies there.
Hmm.
And honestly, I think I've enjoyed every one that I've seen, even the ones that are not as good. I think they're at least worth watching. So I think he is probably one of my favorite Hollywood directors.
Hmm.
But but seven of his films were selected for the National Film Registry by the Library of Congress, which is an honor. Double Indemnity, The Lost Weekend, Sunset Boulevard, Ace in the Hole, Sabrina, Some Like It Hot, and The Apartment. And also three movies he wrote and didn't direct. Midnight, 1939, Ninotchka, also 1939, and Ball of Fire, 1941.
Hmm.
So he did well. His movies did well.
No, he's a great filmmaker. And like I said, I mean, my only thing is that I preferred some of the other filmmakers during that era.
Yeah.
And when you hear his resume, you're like, oh my God, that what an incredible resume! Some of the greatest films ever made. Well, you're talking about the studio era, where like if every director is making like 100 movies, and you have the backing of the studio and some of the signed actors that are signed to that studio, so you know you're going to get top talent and top everything, then you're going to have a lot of great filmmakers making a lot of great films. If you have like 50 to 100 movies on your resume, some of them are gonna be great. So not to take anything away from them, but like, Howard Hawks and John Ford and John Huston, William Wilder. Uh, I just, there's just they were just better to me, and that's not a knock. That's just saying that there were a lot of great filmmakers during the studio era.
This kind of brings us to the writing, which we kind of talked about a little bit, and the fact that he started out as a writer, Billy Wilder. But he always liked to work with people when he was writing. He didn't like to write on his own. He always had a partner. And he had two long term partnerships, Charles Brackett from '36 to 1950, and I.L. Diamond from '57 to '81. So he had two long partnerships there, but in between, well, not really in between, I guess during the first partnership, he made Double Indemnity, and he worked with a different writer, which was, of course, Raymond Chandler, famous novelist. And the reason that that happened is that his regular partner, Charles Brackett, he didn't like this idea, this movie, this book. He just thought it was too sleazy or something. He didn't like the subject matter, so he kind of bowed out. I think he helped with the initial treatment, but then he said, "No, I don't want to do this," and he kind of backed out. So Billy Wilder was looking for another writing partner, and he would have liked James L. Cain, who wrote the novel. He would have liked him to do it, but he was actually working at another studio. He was kind of becoming a screenwriter as well, and he was not able to do this. So that's when somebody said, well, there's this other guy, Chandler, and they gave Billy Wilder a copy of his book, The Big Sleep. And of course, Billy Wilder was very impressed, and he thought, yeah, bring me this guy. It's going to be wonderful. And so for me, this is amazing because you got two of the sort of most important hard-boiled fiction writers involved in this. You know, James L. Cain, who wrote the book, and Raymond Chandler, who didn't write this book, but he wrote a lot of great books, and he co-wrote the screenplay. So to me, it's like hard-boiled royalty or something. This is like two of the great writers in this genre, both working on this in a way. So that's really amazing to me. But of course, the partnership didn't really go that well. Chandler and Billy Wilder, they didn't really get along. They had various problems. But they stuck with it and they did it, and I mean the end result is fabulous. Did you ever read either of those writers?
Well, yeah, in prepping, I did skim the Maltese Falcon for the previous noir we did, and I did skim this book as well. The main thing I got from this book is that the plotting and the story is good. I found a lot of it a little bit boring because it's just like, and then I did this, and then I did that, and then I did this, and this is what you have to do. It's just so procedural. But when you got into like the the backstabbing and the action towards the end where things started to come together, it got a little bit more interesting. But this was a great move by getting Chandler in here because the dialogue. Oof, the dialogue to me is what really elevates this. The dialogue in the book is not anything at all. It's not anything special. The names of the characters are awful. It's almost like it's Nerdlinger is the name.
Nerdlinger.
Imagine saying Nerdlinger constantly, because that's what you're hearing in the book.
Yeah.
Imagine that in a movie. The names of
Yes.
the characters, the dialogue, none of that was any good. The plotting, the story, everything that was involving, the actual murder was good. And how he's going to get caught, worried about getting caught, all the planning, that's good. But yeah, the dialogue and the names of the characters, Chandler, I think, really helped with changing that because there's some really good classic film noir dialogue in this movie that you wouldn't have had without Chandler.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And Chandler is really known for his amazing writing, like not necessarily the plot, but just the writing itself is really good. He comes up with a lot of great, not just dialogue, but just great lines, when you read the book. A lot of it's just wonderful. He's almost like a poet in a way. He really puts words together in a really great way. Um,
Yeah, I mean that was one of the best aspects of the Maltese Falcon is the dialogue. And even in a scene that everyone that first scene where you see her come out in the towel, right? Everyone talks about the wig. We talked about the wig. People talk about
yes.
the towel. People talk about her being at the top of the stairs and coming down the stairs, and that wasn't in the book, and it's so brilliant, and it's a moment that's recreated in cinema since then. It's part of the language of cinema. A beautiful woman coming down the top of the stairs, and you walk in and you're gasped, and like, oh my God, like all that's great. All that's great, brilliant. They added a bunch of stuff. What's lost in that scene? In the book, the maid that opens the door, or whatever, or whoever opened the door, just had mundane dialogue, whatever. Yeah, you have a seat. They bring so much personality to her in that scene that's just no one talks about. But I wanted to see more scenes with the maid. She's so funny in
Oh,
that scene where she's like, "Yeah, by the way, the liquor cabinet's locked." She's like, she sees like he's has eyes for. her boss or whatever, or, whatever she consider her, the woman she's working for. And just like her attitude, her casual sarcasm, and the interplay they had, where he's like, "Yeah, well, I work with my own key" and stuff like that. Just their interplay. It's nothing. It's like you wouldn't think anything of it, but the idea to put that in there, just subtleties like that, just I loved.
Yeah. Yeah, well, this is actually it's a Cain book that I haven't read. I have a copy of it, but I've read quite a few of his books. I sort of got into him at some point, and I remember being in a bookstore, and I had one of his books in my hand, and the owner of the store said to me, "Oh yeah, that's a great book." And he said, people sometimes ask, what is the greatest book written by Ernest Hemingway? And the answer is anything by James L. Cain, which I thought was really interesting because, basically they're both writers that are known for being very simple and straightforward in terms of their writing and the language and everything. They're very easy. But it's the story, I guess, and the action of the story that people are really interested in. And I think Cain, he writes more like, I suppose, of appealing stories in a way, like they're crime stories. They're lurid. So there's something about them maybe that appeals more than Ernest Hemingway's more literary kind of books. Although I'm sure somebody will take me to task for saying that, but I just found it very interesting that somebody compared the two and felt that Cain was actually better or more of a fun read. But
I don't think that's a very popular opinion.
well, maybe not. But he certainly, as a writer, I mean, he's written a ton of books and a ton of stories, and so many of them have been made into films, or he's been involved in
Did he
film.
was the one that wrote "The Postman Always Rings Twice," right?
Yes, he was. In fact, he
So
wrote that.
I think this was just a playoff of that.
It kind of was, I think, because he wrote "The Postman Always Rings Twice" first, and it was a big success. And people, I think they'd been interested in making that into a movie, but it was kind of impossible. And so I think he decided, okay, that's not going to work out for me, so I'll write another book that's kind of in the same vein. And of course, the rest is history with that. But he also wrote books called Serenade, which was made into a movie with Mario Lanza and Joan Fontaine and Vincent Price, which they say kind of they got rid of everything that made the book interesting, made kind of a pale version in the movie. But he also wrote Mildred Pierce, which became a very famous movie as well. So a lot of his books have been turned into movies one way or another. He
Hmm.
also worked on scripts like for Algiers, 1938, which you may recall is actually the remake of Pepe Le Moko, one of your favorites,
Hmm.
Algiers. So he worked on that screenplay. He also did uncredited rewrites on Out of the Past,
I
great
thought we
film.
were talking about Billy Wilder. Why are we getting into the weeds with Kane?
Well, that's just to say he's got the amazing sort of hard-boiled credibility, and this is where he comes from.
Yeah.
Um,
The
um,
one thing I will say before we move on, from the writing aspect of it is this story. Now, we've delved into different subgenres before. And when we delved into slashers, a lot of the slasher stuff was based in true story with the Ed Gein situation, the serial killer. And then, you had a movie like Texas Chainsaw Massacre that was inspired, used, those real murders for inspiration. And then subsequently, because of the success of that, you had more people adapting the Ed Gein stuff and more people adapting Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And then that whole case became sort of like the language and the molding of what slashers would be. And in a way, the same thing could be said with haunted house movies when we did that. The Warrens and their whole situation, greatly their real or true stories, quote unquote, affected how haunted house movies were made and became the language and sculpted the cliches and the tropes that were part of that subgenre. And I think the same thing can be said with Cain and his novels, The Postman Always Rings Twice, Double Indemnity. And also, there was a real case at the time of a woman who had an affair with someone and they murdered her husband and they got caught and she got murdered on the electric chair and it was like front page news and a big scandal. And I think that could be the backbone for a lot of film noirs. Not obviously not all of them, but that subgenre in the subgenre of film noirs where, the woman having the affair, and let's get rid of my husband and can you trust her? Is she double crossing you? And all that stuff. I think that can be rooted in the Cain novels and also with the real story as well. And how many times have we seen movies since um Double Indemnity? We went on to see The Postman Always Rings Twice and a lot of other movies, and not even in the film noir genre, but in the crime genre, in the erotic thriller genre, where a guy will come into a house and see a beautiful woman that's taken, and she's going to say, "Hey, like my husband's horrible, like, but I wish I could be with you only if we can get rid of my husband and we can get rid of him and get the money and the insurance and I'm sure some of that, or not all, even not all of that, sounds very familiar to moviegoers as cliches and tropes in movies they've seen, and a lot of it comes from this.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was, you were referring to the 1927 murder perpetrated by Ruth Snyder, who was married to Albert Snyder and her lover, Henry Judd Gray. And they actually colluded with an insurance agent to obtain a $45,000 insurance policy. And it had a double indemnity clause. And they did it, of course, without Albert's knowledge. And then they had him murdered. And it's unlike in this movie, it's like a really brutal murder, too. Like they strangle him with a picture wire. They stuff his nose full of chloroform soaked rags. And then they beat him with a sash weight, which I didn't even know what that was. But apparently in old houses, they have sash windows, they call them, which are basically multi-paned windows that raise up and down. And you have weights that are used to, I guess, help with that, raising it up and down. And so they can weigh like 20 pounds, these things. So they used one of these sash weights to beat him as well as everything else. And they tried to make it look like a burglary, which of course didn't work. And apparently she tried to murder him several times prior to this, and they all failed. So it's an
You
insane
figure you
story.
get the hint, It's
It's
like,
insane. But yes, it was absolutely
hey,
the
honey, for some reason that oatmeal you made me this morning had arsenic in it. That's so weird. Like, and the
yeah.
coffee had bleach in it. What's so weird? Like, how does she try to kill him several times and he doesn't take the hint?
I don't know. Yeah, that's a good question. But it totally was the inspiration and the basis for Double Indemnity. And it also was an inspiration for The Postman Always Rings Twice. The story wasn't quite the same, but he did take some inspiration from it when he created that story first. And then he kind of went whole hog into it with Double Indemnity. And of course, the success of this movie, particularly, caused a whole bunch of imitators, like you're saying, and he was so mad about it, he wanted to sue them all because he felt they were all ripping off his story. But of course, you can't really copyright a story like that. You can only,
Especially since it wasn't his story.
yeah, exactly. But any story, it's more about the way you express it than the actual story itself. But
Mhm.
in any case, yeah, it really opened the floodgates. And I think a lot of movies, whether they even know it, some of them are probably ripping off
Once it
each other.
becomes a language, no one knows it. It's just the way
Yeah,
it's always been.
exactly. Yeah.
I was like,
So,
hey, let's do a slasher movie. Remember, we need a killer with like a blade, and he's got to come and kill a bunch of teenagers. No one's thinking, oh, where did that start, or who started it, or who's Ed Gein, and the
no,
Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I was thinking about any of that stuff.
yeah, totally. totally. So let's talk about the casting now. All three of the stars of this movie were somewhat reluctant to do it for one reason or another. And of course, well, they went through other people in some cases before they even settled on these stars. Um, I think that one of your favorite actors was even offered a chance to play the role of.
James Cagney?
Well, he might have been. I'm not sure, but Walter Neff. They think apparently they talked to a lot of people, and nobody really wanted to do this. Nobody wanted to play this part. And Billy Wilder eventually said that he scraped the bottom of the barrel, and he actually asked George Raft to do it, which
George Raft was at the bottom of the barrel.
he was the bottom of the barrel.
What
Yeah.
was he down there doing? Turning down Casablanca?
I'm not even sure, but apparently Billy Wilder went to meet with them, and George Raft didn't even want to look at the script. He just said, "Tell me about it. Tell me the story." And so, Billy Wilder kind of told him the story, and then he says, "Okay, okay, just skip to the lapel scene." And Billy Wilder's like, "Lapel scene? What are you talking about?" And he says, "Well, the scene where the guy flips up his lapel and he's got a badge and he's really a cop who's been entrapping this woman the whole time." And Billy Wilder said, no, no, that's not really what we're doing here. So George Raft was out. He didn't want to play a bad guy who wasn't an undercover cop. So they eventually settled on Fred MacMurray. Do you think Fred MacMurray was a bad choice?
So, I mean, yeah, obviously I think Fred McMurray was a bad choice. But aside from the choice of Fred McMurray, so this is a pattern that we would later see with Wilder, is that he would pick comedic actors or unconventional actors for his lead roles. Jack Lemmon obviously is someone that's stuck for a while. And even William Holden was a little bit of an unconventional casting at the time. Now, William Holden's career developed in a way that it became a great casting choice. But at the time when he was casting William Holden, I think the first movie they did together was Sunset Boulevard. It was a little bit of a reach. So he's always been unconventional. He's always leaned toward comedic actors in dramatic roles. So I've never been a big Fred MacMurray fan. I mean, what I know him
No.
from is the Disney movies I would play on TV as a kid, like, the
Yeah.
Blubber movie or
Yeah.
whatever that movie was called.
Shaggy DA, Son of Flubber.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, all that nonsense.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm not a Fred MacMurray guy. I think he was good in this movie though. I'm not denying he wasn't good in the movie,
Yeah.
but he's just not who I would lean towards for something like this. You don't think of Fred MacMurray when you think of this movie. And again, taking nothing away from his performance because his performance is very good. However, when I started thinking about all the other options, I'm like, wait a minute, were they even acting at that point? Like Burt Lancaster, I think then his first role came in The Killers, which was after this.
I believe so. Yeah. I believe
Yeah, you
so.
think of you start going through the potential people. We did another film noir with the this other guy with the dimple in his chin.
Kirk Douglas.
Kurt Douglas was no, not Kurt Douglas. Obviously, Kurt Douglas. He was in that movie though.
Robert Mitchum.
Robert Mitchum. Was Robert Mitchum even an option at this time? I think Robert Mitchum would have been a great option. I mean, but again, was he? Burt Lancaster. Like I'm visualizing people that would you think would knock this role out the ballpark and be much better in this role, but were they even actors then or like main players then? So this was at an odd time, and I started thinking about like what was going on in Hollywood around that time. You think about wartime, right?
Mhm.
Wartime, you have a lot of men, tall, strong, young men going to war. What are the type of men that aren't going to war? Men with defects, small, older, those type of men.
Yeah.
So that is one theory that does come out of like film noir. It's like there weren't a lot of casting options for the typical leading men during wartime, so you had to go unconventional. So getting a comedic actor certainly plays into that. Getting older actors definitely plays into that. And Alan Ladd's like 5'2", 110 pounds. Like,
Yeah, yeah.
hey, women are taller and heavier than Alan Ladd. And I'm not
Yes.
talking about tall or heavy women, just like an average woman is big. And Alan Ladd starred in a lot of film noirs. Humphrey Bogart, and like you think about
Yeah.
these film noir leads, they aren't like tall, big men, and they're not necessarily that young, a lot of them. So that's one theory of film noir. People look at it, oh, the sensibilities, the themes, a lot of that had to do with the way people were feeling coming back from the war. But I think the casting also affected that as well. You didn't really have a ton of options. So Fred MacMurray, is he a great option? I wouldn't say so, but I don't think there were a lot of great options to be had.
Well, you could be right. And I mean, the thing about Fred MacMurray is I think he was one of their biggest stars at the time. Like, he was really popular in a series of movies that would, largely they're forgotten now, just these feel good comedies.
Well, I'm
Like,
saying for this particular role is what I'm saying.
but yeah, but so that he was not the type of guy you would think, but he was a big star. So you can see
That's like
why they're,
saying, okay, that's like saying, okay, Adam Sandler's a big star, right? But
yeah.
would you cast Adam Sandler in like Oppenheimer?
Well, I think, maybe if I was a low budget guy and I was making Oppenheimer on a low budget and I thought, well, if I had a star in it and I could convince Adam Sandler to do it, then maybe, maybe that would
Well, if you
be,
didn't have a budget, you're not getting Adam Sandler. So
well, true enough. But no, I'm just saying that, from a point of view of here's a guy who's marketable, he's got a legion of fans who like him. And this is kind of the brilliance of it, I think, is that people are expecting him to be this super nice guy that they like. And I think in a way they do as soon as they see him on the screen, but he's right away not quite that nice guy. He's kind of
but that
plotting
kind
against.
of contradicts what you were saying and the way things played out in that he wasn't the top choice necessarily, was he?
No, he wasn't. I think he was an afterthought, after they
Mhm.
went through everybody else that was
Mhm.
more perhaps traditional. And then, the thing is, Fred MacMurray himself, he said, well, you've got the wrong guy, because I don't do this. I do light, fluffy comedies. I don't do serious stuff like this. I don't do dark stuff. But, Billy Wilder, I think the other thing about Billy Wilder, he once said that if there's anything I hate more than not being taken seriously, it's being taken too seriously. So maybe on some level, that's why he likes to bring in the comedy, like bring in a comedic actor who can handle the more serious stuff, but he can also do comedy. Maybe there's something there that he wants both sides somehow. He wants both of those things. And it's probably easier to get a dramatic performance out of somebody who's good at comedy than it is to teach someone who isn't good at comedy how to be funny, maybe.
I guess, but there wasn't any levity in this movie,
No,
which
there
is why I
was.
like it because even
No.
like movies back then, even a lot of movies now, there's like, all right, let's break the tension with like a comedy character or a slapstick character or a slapstick scene, or
Yeah.
like there's no levity breaking in this movie. It's all serious.
Yeah, but I
Well,
mean,
I shouldn't say that. There was the one guy in the with Edward G. Robinson that I get set fire to his truck or
yeah,
something, and Edward G.
yeah,
Robinson was kind of funny with that.
yeah.
But for
But
the most part, there's not a lot of levity in the movie.
no, but I mean, the dialogue, as you were saying, it's really good dialogue and it's clever, and so they deliver it well. And it's you wouldn't call it comedy exactly, but it does kind of make you smile or it makes you laugh when they say things that are really clever. flirting with each other or whatever they're doing in the moment. So maybe there is something there that someone who's good with comedy really handles those
The
lines.
timing. Yeah.
The timing, yeah.
Yeah.
But what about Barbara Stanwyck? I mean, she was a big star as well, and
Mhm.
she was
So
reluctant.
should we include her wig in the category, or should they be two separate categories?
Well, I think we can mention the wig. I don't think we have to keep it out, but
Oh, God.
here
Just for
we
talking
go.
about
Here
it.
we go. Yeah,
I'll just put it
beautiful,
on top of the head.
beautiful.
But speaking of Barbara Stanwyck, yeah. So I mean, the wig is kind of distracting to me, but her
Yeah,
performance, I guess, if you can look past the wig, was really good. I mean, in the
yeah.
book, she wasn't really a main player. I mean, she was a main player because there's so few characters, but I guess I should say she was more prominent in the movie than the book, a little bit
Mm,
more. In the book, it was more talking about her and about like her past, and she may have done other things before. She's like this
yeah,
serial killer type, and she's done all these other killings, possibly more, getting
yeah,
into things like that. But as far as like her actual role in the book and the movie, I think she was more prominent in the movie. One thing about Stanwyck was with the casting, was she attractive enough for the role?
totally. I
Yeah.
mean, I've always liked her, and I do think she is attractive. She
Mhm.
isn't like necessarily the typical beauty queen, but she is, I think she's attractive. I think she is a beautiful woman, but she has character. She's got more uniqueness than maybe some of the other just straight up beautiful women.
No, she's not Marilyn Monroe. She's not Ava Gardner or some of those other like absolute knockouts at the time. But I think she was fine in this, especially since this wasn't really a romantic movie. The
No.
romance ended very quickly.
Yes.
I mean, it's essentially her coming down the stairs. They have this really good back and forth dialogue about speed limits and watch how fast you're going. And then, there's a slight blow up when she kind of hints towards like, well, how about some insurance on my husband? Accidents happen, wink, wink. And then, you have the scene where she goes to his apartment. And then you fade away, you come back, and she's putting on her lipstick, kind of implying, like, gee, why is she touching up her lipstick? They were just on the couch, just sitting there, kind of
Yeah.
implying that, like, maybe they just made
Yeah.
love, or she
Yeah.
just used her mouth for something to make him feel better. I don't
Yeah.
know.
And he's
But
he's and he's looking really relaxed and he's smoking a cigarette. Yeah. There's
he's
definitely some.
suddenly willing to kill. All we know is they're on the couch talking about killing the husband. Cut away, she's fixing her lipstick. Suddenly he's fully on board with killing the husband.
Yeah.
She did some between her mouth and that lipstick and something in between that scene. Something happened where he's like, you know what? Your husband's gotta go. But
Yeah.
I don't even know what we're talking about anymore. I'm just so
Oh,
sidetracked. It's
we're
nonsense.
talking about Barbara Stanwyck, and is she good looking enough for this
Oh
character?
God, God.
And
Okay.
I would say she is because again, it comes back
Ugh.
to the wig, and I mean the wig is phony. In a way, she's phony, and she's kind of maybe she's. It's more about her attitude, as we may have talked about in the Maltese Falcon.
Mhm.
It's like her attitude is kind of what sells it. She's sexy. She is really working her magic on him, and I believe it. I think she is attractive enough, and I think he finds her attractive, and we think
Yeah.
he might be a bit of a player too. I think he probably prides himself on picking up a variety of different women. So why not this one?
Mhm. Yeah, I got my bearings back. So, yeah, what I was trying to say was that it's not a very sexy movie. Aside from those two scenes, coming down this, well, three scenes, coming down the stairs, the speed limit dialogue, the lipstick
Yeah,
touch up. Aside from that stuff, right? That's where the romance ends. After that, it's just planning the murder. She wants to get rid of her husband for the money. He's this insurance guy that knows how this system works and tries to beat the system. He's
Hmm.
trying to beat the system. She's trying to get rid of her husband and get the money. They're not focused on like we need to get together, get the husband out the way so we can be alone together. He's keeping us apart. There's none of that. There's none of this passion and torrid affair. There's like, man, I've been doing this my whole life. I know I can beat the system. Let me beat the system. And in the book, it's very much like that. It's just like all about like, oh, this is how it works. This is what I got to do. And then with her, she just wants to get rid of the husband for the money. Like, there's no real, like, I mean, yeah, if you got an Ava Gardner's more attractive, but then the focus is on, like, oh my God, Ava Gardner. Like, I'd kill anything for that. But, like, that's not the focus of the movie. The focus of the
No.
movie is, like, are they going to get away with it? These two characters falling apart. The fact that you really get the sense that, like, they're not necessarily dying to be together, you know? It's just like,
Mhm.
all right, I can't get caught. I have to get rid of her now. She has to get rid of him now because now they're can they trust each other? Like, it's more so
Yeah.
that it's about two self-centered people coming together for a common goal. Things go wrong and now they turn on each other, and that's kind of the focus on it. It's not about a passionate affair. So I
No,
think she
not.
works fine in that sense.
Yeah, yeah. And we're kind of getting into the sort of character separate from actor a little bit here
Oh
in
yeah,
this,
we kind of are, yeah. Yeah.
but that's okay. And I think what I will say is that I think you're right. I think, yes, he is attracted to her, and yes, he wants to be with her, even if it's just temporarily. But I think he is also an example of that great human nature thing of, when you find out that something is supposed to be impossible, like climbing Mount Everest, you can't do it, it's impossible, you're going to die. Oh, yeah, well, I'm going to do it, and I'm going to prove it can be done. And I think that's kind of what's going on with him. It's like, oh, you can't beat the insurance company, you can't beat Keys, you're never going to do it. And then he starts thinking and going, well, if anyone can do it, it's me. And this is a challenge, and so I think it does become a bit of an obsession and a challenge quite separate from her. And I think it's human nature. I think a lot of people probably would get caught up in that given the same opportunity. I have an inside view of what goes on. I know Keys, I know what he does. I'm the only guy who's close enough to really maybe beat the system. So I'm going to try it, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Yeah, the
and,
smartest guy in the room is usually the one that gets caught.
yeah,
The person
yeah,
that thinks they're the smartest guy in the room. So yeah, we kind of overlapped. It's my fault with the characters and the actors because I emphasize that we have to keep these things separate. So what do I
yeah,
do? I start babbling and I get them both mixed up. So since
yeah,
they're already mixed up, we'll just cover both. So the other main player in this is Edward G. Robinson. Now, in the
yes,
book, his character wasn't really such a big player. He kind of comes in early on, and then at the end, he's kind of the one that kind of wraps everything up. So he's kind of more like a bookend type character, where he's kind of there to like tie things up because he's the one by the books, figures it out, comes in at the end, and he's just kind of established early on. Here, he's more kind of spotty in the movie. He's kind of um because you don't have any real relationships that have any value in there where you are like what do these people care about? You have to have someone there that like kind of brings some humanity to the main character. And I think Edward G. Robinson does that in that, all right, this main character at least has a real relationship there. There's some
yeah,
kind of there's some kind of person that will care if he dies or care
yeah,
if something happens to him, you know? And
yeah.
I think Edward G. Robinson kind of fulfills that.
He does, and a lot of people have commented that in a way, the real love story of this movie is between these two men. It's Walter Neff and Keyes, Barton Keyes. They're the two guys who really love each other. You could call it bromance, I suppose, in modern terms, but that's where the real power of the movie is, and their relationship and where they end up at the end of the movie together. And they get the final moment together because we care more about that in a way. It has more power than whatever that relationship was between him and Phyllis Dietrichson, that we don't really believe that there's any real
Mrs.
love there.
Nerdlinger in the book.
And Nurtner, yes,
What an awful name.
that's right.
But yeah, I've heard that. There's a little bit of homosexuality there. There's a bit father-son there.
Mhm.
I don't buy any of that. I don't see them as father-son, and I don't see them as like homosexual. I don't get any of that vibe from there. I just think it is two people who work together for a while that have this certain relationship, like a good work relationship. I see myself having that type of relationship with some of my coworkers in the past and even currently, where it's just like, yeah, like I don't know anything about you outside of work, but I kind of know you from being around you, And it's like, yeah, I care about you to an extent. And I think that's all there is. Like, he doesn't care about him to an extent where he's going to help him get away with murder. He doesn't care about him to an extent where he's not going to turn him in. He cares about him to an extent like, geez, like I know you. This is what you did this? Like we've been co-workers for so long, like my expectations of you were so much higher. And you kind of feel that MacMurray doesn't want to disappoint him. Not the sense because he's a father, because here's someone that knows him and that expects better from him. It's like you don't want to disappoint someone who thinks more of you than you think of yourself, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of what you're getting there. Not that the sense that like, oh my God, he's my lover, or like I can't disappoint. It's not anything like that, or it's not like,
Oh,
oh man, like he's like the father I never had. I don't believe any of that. But that's just opinion. It's not
yeah.
fact. I mean, what's your opinion on their relationship?
Well, I agree with you. I don't see any kind of a homosexual relationship. I think that's just odd. That's just a way that people like to reinterpret things. But I did kind of see it as a father-son thing when I saw this movie for the first time. I saw the older guy who's trying to take the younger guy under his wing and say, "Hey, come work with me. Stop doing this cheap sales work you're doing. Do a more important job." So I did kind of see there was a little bit of a, if not father-son, kind of mentor. Like I'm going to help you. I'm going to turn you into a better man. He tells him to stop going out with these cheap women like Margie or whatever he calls her on the phone. So I think he does, there is something there. That's
Mm,
where the real relationship is, I think, that we care about is between those guys.
yeah, yeah,
You know, I think the movie tries to be a little more ambiguous than the book in terms of what her real motives are. They do suggest she might have killed someone else before, but they don't suggest she's a rampant serial killer.
yeah. The
And
book is a very, very. Yeah. It's she's a terrible person in the book. She does a lot of
yeah,
bad things. Yeah,
but they're kind of almost suggesting maybe she does feel something for him. Maybe there is something there. It's kind of hard to know for sure,
hmm
but I've never took it as real. I think she's just using him, and that's kind of the way it plays out.
yeah, yeah. The daughter or the stepdaughter.
Lola.
Uh, yeah, I mean, there's not a lot to her character, even in the book. The one thing I thought was interesting in the book that I don't know, for me, this is the most entertaining part of the book for me is so he starts falling for the stepdaughter because he can't spend time around, the wife because the whole thing is going down and they can't be seen together, et cetera, et cetera. So he starts spending time around the stepdaughter. He starts falling for the stepdaughter. He starts doing the math. Well, I'm 35, she's 19. Well, 1 year from now, she'll be 20 and I'll be 36. That's not really that bad. That's not bad of an age difference. He's thinking, hey, like, she's Audrey Hepburn and I'm William Holden. He's doing that type of math.
This is
So,
not
or
go-karts.
yeah, he's like, hey, she's Zendaya or
Yeah.
Sydney Sweeney, and I'm Who did we say was going to be the 36-year-old
Ryan,
Ryan? I'm Ryan Gosling. He's doing that type of math. So he's
yeah,
like fantasizing about like, yeah, like maybe I should have went for her this whole time. Like, and he starts falling for her. And then he ends up getting shot by the boyfriend, the guy who's kind of like between, the wife and all that stuff.
yes,
And when he got shot by the boyfriend or the young guy that's around, the girl that he's falling for, he finds out from the character who was played by Edward G. Robinson that while she was happy that he wasn't killed, she was also happy that he was willing to shoot him because it showed that he cared about her. It's like, what the fuck?
yeah.
It's like women, man. Fucking women. So in the book, like, what's his name?
Nino Zacchetti.
Zacchetti. So
Yeah,
Zacchetti, right? So
yeah,
in the book, she kind of likes Zacchetti, but she thinks Zacchetti likes the mother, something like that, from what I can remember.
yeah.
And so she's into Zacchetti. Zacchetti's not really into her. She kind of wishes Zacchetti was more into her. And then when Zacchetti shoots him, she's like, oh, Zacchetti must have shot him because Zacchetti saw them together so much, right? And he's like, oh, he shot him for me? He really loves me. It's like fucking women, man. So she ends
Yeah.
up getting with Zacchetti in the book after Zacchetti shoots him because she's so happy that some guy was willing to kill somebody for her. So
Uh-huh.
I just thought that when I read that, I was like, that's so hilarious and so like, God, I don't know. I was just entertained by that. But that was the most entertaining part of her character, but that wasn't even in the movie. In the movie, she's kind of boring to me. Just kind of like a character there to push the story along.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's interesting because he does in the movie seem to be taking an interest in her, Walter Neff. But I think, partly because we are under the Hays Code and everything, I think he realizes that, oh, it wouldn't be right. It's not good for her. And so he kind of does the right thing, I guess, and kind of gets Zacchetti to kind of go back to Lola. But, it's all very weird because if Sacchetti's been having an affair with Phyllis, sending her back to or him back to the stepdaughter, it all seems kind of twisted. There's
Yeah,
nothing really.
it's kind of ambiguous. Is he having an affair? Even in the book,
Yeah,
like I couldn't really get a good read on it. Because in the book they said something about make love, but make love didn't necessarily mean sex back then?
no, no,
It's kind
no,
of weird. Like
yeah,
I was not, I mean, I can lean towards that direction, but it wasn't 100% clear because in the book, the only reason he's involved with that whole family is because he thinks that the wife may have had something to do with the death of one of his family members or something.
oh, yeah,
So, yeah, so he's not even there because he likes her. It's just that he's there to get close. And then I
yeah,
think he ended up liking the daughter somehow, and that's how he stuck around. And I don't know,
okay,
it's very kind of murky if he's having sex with both of them or not. Even in the movie, it's kind of a little gray
yeah.
area on whether he
I
is
think,
or isn't.
yeah, I mean, I think the implication may be that she's just manipulating him. She's not really having sex with him. She's just
Yeah,
kind of,
but are they making it that way because of the Hays Code or because he's not really
well,
having sex with her?
that's the question. Yeah, that's the million
Yeah.
dollar question. I don't know the answer to it, but it seems
Yeah.
like a twist scenario, regardless.
The more
Either way,
entertaining scenario is that he's banging both of them. That would be hilarious.
yeah, well, I suppose, yeah.
This is a really, really good movie. I mean, we didn't get into the technical aspects of it because I don't know, I went on with some rants about Sabrina and some other stuff. But
That's right. Uh,
um and some of the technical aspects is part of the language of cinema. Like I talked about with the whole storyline of let's kill my husband for the insurance money. There's also the Venetian blind scene, and how
mm,
many low budget movies get atmosphere and mood from just shadows of a Venetian blind. That's part of the language of cinema. That's part of how low budget movies like try to build atmosphere. It's just like a Venetian blind shot. And I don't remember seeing it utilized in this way and so effectively prior to this movie. So technically, I mean, it's a lot better looking movie than the last noir we did, The Maltese Falcon. So visually, it's great. Writing, we already went over the dialogue, much like the Maltese Falcon. You have the same writer there. Um, so the writing with the dialogue is good. You have two essentially great novelists, one coming in with dialogue, one coming in with a story. So yeah, the script is amazing. Wilder, again, he contributed to the writing, an all-time great director. Even though he's not my favorite director from that era, he's one of the top directors of that era, and he's one of the greatest directors of all time. And I won't argue with anyone who says he's their favorite director or filmmaker or whatever. Made some of the greatest movies ever made. And aside from Sunset Boulevard, another movie we covered on this channel, I think this is his second best movie. I think it's one of the all-time great film noirs. Maybe not cracking my top five, but it is a worthy entry, and it is one of the best film noirs ever made. It's one of the first film noirs ever made. It is worthy of its reputation. Yeah, a must watch for any film enthusiast.
Yes, I agree with you 100%. And I would put this in my top five for sure. And this is a movie. One thing we didn't talk about is the device here of how they're telling the story and how he's speaking into a dictaphone. And this is kind of the beginning of voiceover narration in these hard-boiled stories. It's done so effectively here. And a lot of times people ask the question, well, who's he talking to? Like when you hear this voiceover, it's not clear. But here, it is so clear. It's so explained. He's leaving a message for keys. And it's brilliant, and I found this, when I saw this, it just inspired me so much. And I wanted to write something that was that clever. And of course, I never did. But I think it's hugely influential. It's very well done. I love this movie, and I think, yeah, it is one of the most influential noirs. It really changed, the genre, which did already exist in a way, but this is sort of one of the key films that really brought a lot of the elements together. And yeah, I think anyone should watch this, whether they're interested in noir or not. I think it's a great movie, and yeah, I just love it. So couldn't recommend it more than I do.
Yeah. We didn't spend a lot of time on Edward G. Robinson. It's kind of my fault. I kind of let those two categories of talking about actors and the characters overspill a little bit. But one thing I will say about Edward G. Robinson is at Warner Brothers specifically, but just in general, you had the 30s with the gangster movies, which are very literal movies. They're very literal. Like what you're seeing is what's actually happening. And then you had that same audience and a lot of those same actors transfer a decade later from the 30s to the 40s with film noirs. Those were now the new action movies, which are very more, they're not literal. They're more about mood and atmosphere and suggestion. They're not straight in your face. A lot of that is because of the Hays Code and budget reasons and different things like that. But you have an actor like Edward G. Robinson that would transition from lead actor in those gangster films to now supporting actor in these type of film noirs. He was also a supporting actor in The Stranger, a film noir with Orson Welles. So he did a transition in his career where he moved from that one genre to the other, and that lead actor to supporting actor as well. And he was certainly great in this as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And he said that he would rather make that transition in something that has a brilliant script than in something that's just mediocre. And so he saw how good this was. He decided, yeah, this is definitely the one to do it in. So I'm glad he did. I think he's wonderful. I think the movie's wonderful. And yeah, I just think everyone should see it.